Hello, my name's Hannah. 2 weeks after my accident, my sister wheeled me into a bank, smiled like everything was fine, and told me to just sign a few things to make life easier. But the papers weren't about helping, they were about erasing me. She'd already changed my meds, taken my mail, shown my home to strangers while I slept, and when I tried to stop her, she squeezed my elbow so hard I nearly cried out. But I didn't. I slipped a note to the bank manager instead. Help. Under duress. Do you know what it feels like to realize someone you love planned to steal your life and make you thank them for it? They say the devil doesn't come with horns. Sometimes she shows up with tea, a pressed blouse, and the scent of lavender lotion, the kind our mother used to wear. I'm Hannah, the youngest, the quiet one, the one who everyone thought would never leave this house, until the accident nearly made that a permanent truth. And Vera? She's my older sister. The one who always said she knew best. That morning, as I sat in my kitchen, wrapped in a robe that still smelled faintly of hospital soap, she waltzed in like she owned the place. I brought you your favorite, she said, placing a cup in front of me. Chamomile with a splash of honey. My favorite, once. The mug was warm in my hands, but something in my chest stayed cold. I stared out the kitchen window. Morning light spilled across the tile floor in that familiar golden way. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. Everything felt rented, borrowed, like I was just a guest in my own life. She opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder. Don't look so nervous, Vera smiled. It's just some paperwork, to help take the stress off. That's how she said it, light, like she was doing me a favor, like this was love. She started explaining something about consolidating accounts, streamlining property taxes. I heard the words, but none of it landed right. I sipped the tea, but my throat tightened on the swallow. The truth is, I didn't want to argue. My legs still ached. My ribs were healing slower than expected. I'd only just stopped sleeping on my side, and Vera knew that. I looked at her, hair in place, makeup subtle, blouse tucked in. She even brought a Bluetooth speaker that played soft instrumental jazz in the background. She was making it all seem so easy, so kind. But something in me, some tiny thread, tightened. I don't know, Vera, I said quietly. She patted my hand. Sweetie, it's just signatures. That's all. I'll be with you every step. There it was again. That tone. It was always the same when she wanted control, but didn't want to sound like it. The tone she used when she told Mom to let me stay home instead of going away to college. The tone she used when she said, you just need rest, not decisions. It brought me back to a memory I hadn't touched in years. The week before Mom passed, she called me into her room. Vera had stepped out for groceries, and Mom looked tired but focused. She means well, Mom whispered, voice raspy. But don't let her run over you, Hannah. You've got more backbone than you let them see. I thought it was just dying wisdom, soft, sentimental words. But now, with Vera sitting across from me, pushing a pen toward my hand, it hit different. Mom always wanted me to take care of you, Vera said, voice just a bit too smooth. I nodded then, not because I agreed, but because arguing would take more breath than I had in me that moment. She folded the papers, stacked them neatly. Let's just head to the bank, she said. It'll take 10 minutes tops. That's how the morning turned. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment I stopped being her sister and started becoming a transaction. The ride to the bank wasn't long, but it was quiet. She offered to push the wheelchair out to her car. At first, I said I could manage with the walker. She smiled, tilted her head like I'd just said something adorably naive, and unfolded the wheelchair anyway. I just want to make things easier, she said as she buckled the strap across my waist without asking. Outside, the sky was blue, but I couldn't shake the feeling of clouds forming beneath my skin. She wheeled me down the ramp she had installed without my permission a week earlier, said it was for safety, said it was her contribution. My keys, which normally hung near the front door, weren't there. I found out later she'd moved them, told the neighbor she was helping manage things since I'd been laid up. As the car pulled onto the main road, she turned the radio to classical, another favorite of Mom's. I looked into refinancing options too, Vera said, offhand, like we were talking about groceries. The place has good equity. I know you're not thinking about it now, but, well, it's just something to consider. My stomach flipped. Refinancing? Don't worry, nothing's happening yet. Yet. The word echoed longer than it should have. I didn't speak after that. I needed to think. Last week, my pill organizer looked different. I couldn't explain it, just a feeling that the color-coded tabs weren't in the right order. Then 2 days ago, I checked the mailbox and found a letter addressed to me, opened and resealed. Vera brushed it off as, the mailman must have done that. I didn't argue, not then, but I started paying attention. Today, I tucked a small piece of notepad paper into my purse. Blank. No words yet. But I folded it 3 times. Clean, crisp corners. I don't know why. I just needed something that felt like mine. A seed of intention. Now, in the passenger seat, I watched the road slip past. Trees blurred, their shadows cutting across my lap like quiet warnings. I glanced at Vera, her hands calm on the wheel, her smile as practiced as ever. Then she reached forward, turned down the music. You trust me, right? It wasn't a question, not really. I looked at her. I looked at the bank ahead. And for the first time in weeks, I looked inside myself and didn't like the silence I found there. So I didn't answer. Instead, I whispered to the window, not loud enough for her, but loud enough for me. Don't forget who's driving. And for the first time in years, I realized it wasn't me. The tires hummed against the road as Vera drove with one hand resting on the steering wheel and the other occasionally adjusting her sunglasses, her movements too calm, too sure. She hummed along to a classical tune playing softly through the speakers, completely at ease, as though we were heading to brunch instead of to a bank where she planned to strip me of everything I had left. I stayed quiet, eyes fixed on the trees lining the road, each one slipping past like a beat in a countdown. My body remained still, but inside, I could feel the tight coil of something raw and unspoken pressing against my ribs. Fear, maybe. Anger, definitely. But mostly, a kind of sharp clarity I hadn't felt since before the accident. You're really lucky, Vera said suddenly, breaking the silence like she was continuing a conversation we'd never started. Most people don't have someone who can step in when things get complicated. I turned my head slowly toward her. She glanced at me, smiling. I mean it. Managing all this, your bills, the property, those hospital forms, it's a lot. I don't mind doing it. I just think sometimes you don't realize how much I've handled for you. I didn't ask you to, I said, voice flat. She laughed, brushing it off like I'd made a joke. Well, you weren't exactly in a position to handle anything, but that's what family's for, right? I leaned slightly forward in the seat, hand reaching toward the folder she'd placed between us on the console. Let me see the papers. Later, she said, gently tapping the folder with 2 fingers. It's all standard, legal lingo that'll just stress you out. I said, let me see them. Her smile didn't falter, but her tone sharpened. Hannah, don't start. You know I wouldn't let anything happen to you. Trust me. She pulled into the next lane. I looked down at the seatbelt across my lap and then at the wheelchair folded behind my seat. Not because I needed it today, my legs were stronger than they had been in weeks, but because she insisted I bring it, said it made things easier. Easier to push, easier to steer. I tried unlatching the seatbelt myself. She reached across and clicked it tighter. Don't, she said quietly. I looked out the window again. A for sale sign flashed by. Then another. You mentioned something about refinancing the house last time you were over, I said, voice careful. Were you serious? She shrugged, casual. Just thinking ahead? The market's strong right now, and it's not like you're up to managing a place like that on your own. My stomach twisted. I never said I was selling. She gave a soft chuckle. Relax. I didn't say you were, but it doesn't hurt to weigh options. I wanted to say something more, something loud, firm, but the words got stuck somewhere behind my teeth. Instead, I reached again for the folder. Hannah, she said, her hand snapping to mine, gripping my wrist just a second too long. Enough. You're not signing your life away. It's just a few signatures. Stop being dramatic. That word, dramatic, was a favorite of hers. She used it any time I stood up for myself, from kindergarten to last week. The silence grew thick again. She turned up the music just a notch, then began talking about a neighbor's new porch renovation like nothing had happened, but I wasn't listening. Instead, my mind wandered back to a few days earlier, late evening, dim hallway light, the sound of Vera's voice drifting down the stairs while she thought I was asleep. She'd been on the phone, hushed but sharp. "She won't know," she said. "She's barely lucid half the time. Trust me, it's better this way." At the time, I'd told myself she must have been talking about something else. Maybe someone at her work, maybe a client, anything but me. But now, sitting in her car with that damn folder and her sweet steel smile, I knew. "You've been showing the house," I said quietly. "What?" "Mrs. Hamilton mentioned it. She saw you walking a couple through last week." Vera's eyes didn't leave the road. "They're just friends. They were curious. It's a nice house." "You brought strangers into my home." "Our home," she corrected. "You're not thinking clearly. I'm just keeping things moving while you get better." I almost laughed. Almost. By the time we reached the bank parking lot, the edges of my patience had started to fray. I was tired of pretending, tired of smiling through the sting, tired of being handled like something fragile, or, worse, inconvenient. She parked the car and got out quickly, moving around to open my door before I could even touch the handle. "Let me help you with the chair," she said, already pulling it from the trunk. "I don't need—" "Hannah," she snapped, then caught herself, softening her tone instantly. "Don't make a scene. You're still healing." She locked the wheels, lowered it, and motioned for me to shift into it. I hesitated. Then I sat, slowly, careful to hide the tremor in my legs, not from pain, but from the weight of what I knew was coming. She buckled the belt again, this time tighter. As she wheeled me toward the bank's front door, she leaned in close, her lips grazing my ear like she was sharing a secret. "Just sign it," she said. "This isn't your decision anymore." The grip on my elbow was sharp, and it lasted longer than it needed to. I didn't pull away. I didn't say a word. I just let it happen, storing the moment like ammunition. My hands stayed folded in my lap, tightly. Inside my purse, the folded paper was still there, blank, but not forgotten. Vera smiled at the teller as we entered. "We're just here for a little cleanup today," she said cheerfully. "Nothing big." No one responded, not the teller, not the security guard, not even the receptionist who usually made light jokes about the weather. It didn't matter, because I wasn't here for jokes. I was here for war. I knew if I wanted to survive this day, I had to stop being quiet. The moment the glass doors parted, a gust of cold air from inside swept across my face, but the heat rising inside me didn't budge. Vera's fingers pressed against the handles of my wheelchair with calculated control, steering me across the bank's polished floor like she was pushing a shopping cart, not a person. The lobby wasn't crowded, just a few people waiting, heads down, checking phones or quietly chatting. But it didn't matter how many were around. This wasn't the kind of war that needed an audience. We barely made it 10 steps in when someone called out, "Vera, that house you showed us last week, so charming." The voice was familiar. Mrs. Leland, one of Mom's church friends, always dressed like Sunday morning, even on a Tuesday. I turned toward the voice, and there she stood by the loan desk, holding her purse like she held her judgment, tight, with a smile. Vera laughed, light and effortless. "Oh, yes, that was just a casual walkthrough." She didn't even hesitate. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Last week?" While I was in the guest room recovering from post-op nausea, Vera had been leading strangers through the house, through my house. I looked at her, but she avoided my eyes. She rolled me right past Mrs. Leland without missing a beat, just a casual walkthrough. That was her word for trespassing. I gripped the armrest tighter, trying to keep the bile from rising. There it was again, that slick confidence, the way she could talk her way into or out of anything. I used to admire it. Now it made my skin crawl. As she wheeled me into the waiting area, a new thought broke through the fog. If she was already showing the house, she wasn't planning for my future. She was eliminating it. I closed my eyes, and just for a second, I was in Mom's room again. 2 days ago, I'd finally opened her desk drawer. Not the top one where she kept stamps and thank you cards, But the bottom drawer, deep, heavy, the one with the key Vera claimed we'd lost. The key had been taped to the back of a family photo. Inside that drawer was a single envelope, sealed with wax like it came from a different century. My name was on the front. Just Hannah, not sweetie, not baby girl, not my love, just my name. Like she wanted me to meet her word to word, woman to woman. I read it 3 times. Promise me you'll never sign anything without reading. This house is your root. Don't let anyone tear it from you, not even your sister, not even yourself if grief makes you soft. The page was old, edges worn, but the ink hadn't faded. She knew. Somehow, Mom knew what Vera was capable of. And now, I did too. Vera turned me toward a side hallway. I knew what was down there. A small glass-walled conference room, too narrow to see clearly from the lobby, private enough for pressure, but public enough to look polite. No, I said quietly, pressing down with both palms to stop the wheels from rolling. She leaned in, voice low and tight. Hannah, not now. I'm not starting, I said, meeting her gaze. I'm remembering. For a moment, her face shifted. The smile faltered. Just a crack, but it was enough. Suit yourself, she said, straightening up. But let's not drag this out. She backed off and walked ahead toward the reception desk. I took the moment to breathe. Deep, quiet, focused. My hand drifted into my purse, fingers brushing the folded piece of paper I'd been carrying all morning. Still blank. I hadn't dared to write anything yet. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I wasn't sure where I'd be safe saying it. But now, the words started forming in my mind. Help. Under duress. 3 words. Not poetry, not a cry, a signal. My thumb traced the edge of the paper. I would write it in block letters, simple and clear, fold it once more, slide it in with my ID. Let it speak for me, quietly, but loudly enough for someone with the right eyes. Vera turned back toward me and motioned to follow. As we moved deeper into the lobby, something inside me shifted. The walls of the bank, once sterile and silent, now felt like a stage, not for performance, but for truth. I looked around. The people sitting in chairs, the banker behind the glass, the security guard near the door. All of them had seen people like Vera before. Smiling, charming, dangerous. And people like me too, wheeled in, smiling on the outside, swallowed by silence on the inside. But not today. Today, I was counting. Every time she'd taken my mail, just to help. Every prescription she'd said she picked up by mistake. Every phone call she'd answered for me. Every, you don't need to worry about that right now. Every time she'd called me confused, emotional, ungrateful. I counted them like debts, stacked tall and unforgiven. And as I stared at her back, watching her walk toward the manager's office, I realized something. The note wasn't just a cry for help. It was my receipt, my record, my voice. And I wasn't going to leave this building the same way I entered. And just before the manager greeted us, I knew what I had to do. He came from the far hallway, calm and polished, wearing a navy suit and an expression that was unreadable, but not unkind. His name tag read Marlowe. He didn't look at Vera. He looked at me. That was the first good sign. Miss Ward? He asked, voice steady. I nodded. My fingers tightened over the arms of the wheelchair, pressing into the fabric, trying to keep the tremble from showing. Vera stepped forward, radiating warm authority. We're just here to take care of some paperwork today. Simple stuff. Just getting things in order after everything. She gave him that bright, practiced smile, the kind she always used when she wanted something to go unnoticed. Marlowe's eyes flicked briefly to her, then returned to mine. Of course, he said, then gestured to the front desk. If I can get your IDs, we'll get started. That was my moment. I reached into my purse slowly, calmly, as though I'd done it 1,000 times. I pulled out my ID first. Underneath it, folded so cleanly it looked like it belonged there, was the note. I'd written it in thick block letters. No frills, no hesitation. Help. Under duress. I laid both the ID and the note down on the counter, pushing them slightly forward as if it were second nature. Vera didn't notice. Marlowe did. His eyes paused for a half second, barely noticeable. Then he nodded and took the items, slipping them into a folder without missing a beat. It was subtle, but it was everything. We moved to the waiting area, a small space near the main hallway with low chairs and a short table. Vera guided my wheelchair into place, then sat beside me, too close. She rested the manila folder on the table and opened it with a flourish. "All right," she said cheerfully. "We'll just knock this out and be on our way." She pulled out a red pen. Always the red pen. It was her signature move, power disguised as preference. "Here," she said, tapping the first page. "Just initial at the bottom." I looked down. The page wasn't labeled clearly. It was dense, legal, long. "What is this for?" I asked. Vera laughed lightly. "Just a permission form, so I can talk to the bank on your behalf. It doesn't change anything." I glanced back down. Irrevocable transfer of ownership. It was bolded, hidden halfway through the page, surrounded by jargon. "You said this was just to help with errands," I said. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned the page. "And here, this just links your accounts to mine, makes it easier to manage bills." I didn't move. She picked up the red pen and pushed it into my hand. "Come on, Hannah. Don't make a scene." The pen felt heavy. The tip pressed against my fingers. She guided it to the paper like I was a child learning to write again. "It's nothing," she whispered. "Just sign." I looked at her face. It was pleasant, relaxed, not angry, not yet, just sure, too sure. I turned to Marlo, who had quietly returned, now standing just behind the receptionist desk. "I'd prefer to review this more closely," I said, keeping my tone steady. Vera's smile stiffened. "Hannah," Marlo stepped forward. "Why don't we take this into a private room?" he said. "That way I can walk both of you through it line by line. It's standard when we have documents like these." Vera's head snapped toward him. "We don't need a room. We're fine here." Marlo didn't blink. "I insist. It's best practice for all parties." Vera hesitated, caught between resisting and maintaining the appearance of cooperation. Finally, she gave a strained smile. "Sure, that's fine." Marlo turned, gave a small nod to the teller behind the counter. It was quick, almost invisible, but I saw it, and I knew what it meant. They were listening. We followed him down a short corridor to a glass-walled office with a frosted panel for privacy. Vera pushed my wheelchair inside and sat across from me. Marlo stayed by the door a moment longer, then closed it gently behind us. Silence fell. He walked to the small table and set down the folder. Then, with care, he placed my note on top of it, just long enough for me to see he still had it. Then he slid it underneath again. "I'll be assisting you today," he said, looking at me. "Let's start by reviewing each section." Vera jumped in. "Honestly, we don't need all that. I explained everything already." Marlo didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me. "Ms. Ward, would you prefer to go through this yourself?" I nodded. Vera made a sound, something between a sigh and a scoff. "She's been under a lot of stress. She doesn't need to." Marlo raised a hand gently, not rudely, but firmly. "Let's give her a moment." He slid the first page toward me. My fingers hovered above the paper, not touching. My voice, when it came, was quiet, but direct. "I'd like to know exactly what each line means." Vera leaned back, arms crossed. "This is ridiculous." I kept my eyes on Marlo. "Start with page 1. He smiled. Not wide, just enough to say, "I hear you." And that's when I knew. We weren't doing it Vera's way anymore, ticking toward either freedom or being erased. The room had a strange stillness once the door latched behind us. Not quiet, exactly. The faint hum of the white noise machine in the corner, the muffled rustle of paper, the squeak of Vera's chair as she settled into it. It all combined into a sort of low-level buzz that pressed against my ears. But the world outside was officially shut out, and I could feel something different in the air. Marlo stood just beside the table, hands lightly resting on a folder, his eyes steady and professional. Vera sat across from me with one leg crossed, perfectly composed, her red pen already uncapped and ready. "Let's start by verifying your documents," Marlowe said, directing the sentence to me, not her. Vera beat me to it. She brought everything, she said. I've organized it for you. ID, medical release, the power of attorney draft, bank access. Should be all there. She slid the folder toward him like a practiced assistant handling her boss's files. He didn't touch it. Instead, he glanced at me again, waiting. I nodded. My ID is in there, and something else. He opened the folder slowly, found the paper tucked between documents, my note, and took a measured breath. He didn't flinch, just nodded once, subtle, and continued flipping. I'll be right back, he said, picking up the folder. Let me get copies and grab some water. He left the room without another word. The second the door clicked behind him, Vera leaned in, voice low but sharp. You really want to drag this out? I didn't answer. She softened, her voice dipping into that syrupy tone she always used when cornered. I'm just trying to protect you. You've been through a lot. You're still fragile. All this stress, it's not good for your recovery. She reached out and touched my arm. The same place she'd gripped earlier. There was still a faint ache there. I stiffened. You're not well, Hannah, she whispered. You know you're not. And this little stunt? It's just going to embarrass you. I stared at her hand on mine, but didn't move. Her nails were perfect, painted soft pink, manicured like she had no unfinished business in the world. I'm not embarrassed, I said. Her eyes narrowed. You should be. Just then, the door opened again and Marlowe returned. He held a small tray with 2 paper cups of water. Behind him, the same teller from earlier, the young woman with the kind eyes, followed. She didn't say a word, just placed the cups down and nodded at me before stepping back out. But her eyes, those eyes, held me for a second longer. And in them, I saw something I hadn't seen all morning, recognition. She had seen the bruise, and she had believed what she saw. Marlowe placed the documents back on the table, sliding the copies toward me. We'll go through these together, he said, line by line. Vera reached for the stack. There's no need. I've already gone over this with her. Marlowe didn't look at her. Ms. Ward, he said, you're the account holder. You decide how we proceed. That's when Vera's grip tightened again. She didn't say a word, but her fingers pressed down on my arm, just below the elbow, hard. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was a reminder, a warning. The same pressure I'd felt a dozen times before in different forms, words, guilt, silence. Now it was just bone and skin. I didn't flinch. Instead, I looked her dead in the eye and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It wasn't meant to be. She pulled her hand back slowly, trying not to look shaken. Marlowe began speaking again, reading the titles of the documents aloud. This first page, he said, tapping it lightly, is the one marked for transfer of real estate ownership. Specifically, it lists the property on Palmetto Street as being reassigned into sole ownership of the signer, your sister, Vera. I tilted my head slightly, eyes still on the page. Vera let out a laugh that was more exhale than amusement. It's standard, she said quickly. It just makes it easier for me to manage the maintenance and taxes. It also removes Ms. Ward from legal ownership, Marlowe replied evenly, and assigns all equity and decision-making power to the transferee, permanently. Vera didn't answer that. Marlowe continued. This next form gives access to all linked bank accounts and allows fund movement without consent. The power of attorney draft also removes medical decision authority from Ms. Bonch Ward and grants it to you. Combined, these documents effectively shift financial and personal control to one party. Vera opened her mouth, but he raised his hand. For compliance purposes, he said calmly, I must speak with Ms. Bonch Ward directly. Ms. Vera, I'll ask you to wait outside for a few minutes while I verify these details. Vera froze. Excuse me? Marlowe stood, motioned to the door. It won't take long. I'm her sister, she snapped. I'm not leaving her alone when she's clearly… He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in his tone cut through her like a clean blade. For compliance, I must speak directly with the account holder. Vera stared at me, eyes wild with disbelief. You're letting him treat me like a criminal? I didn't answer. Marlowe opened the door and nodded toward the teller. She stepped closer. He whispered something I couldn't hear. Vera remained seated, arms crossed, lips tight. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Marlowe turned to her one last time. "If you don't step out, I'll need to pause the appointment entirely. That will flag the transaction for review by our legal team. It may also result in a hold on any action involving the property or funds in question." That got her. She stood abruptly, pushed her chair back with more force than necessary, and stormed out. As the door closed again, I exhaled, not in relief, but in readiness, because now I was alone with the truth. Vera had power, but I had witnesses now, and I wasn't alone. Marlowe tapped the corner of the stack of documents gently, then reached under the desk and pressed a small button. I didn't ask what it did. I didn't need to. Whatever came next had already been set in motion. The tiny red light on the voice recorder glowed to life. It sat between us, blinking quietly like a heartbeat. Vera noticed it, of course. Her lips thinned. She crossed her legs and leaned back into the chair like she was preparing for a deposition. "This is unnecessary," she said flatly. "We've already explained everything." "We'll go over it again," I replied. Calm, steady, louder than she expected me to be. She shifted in her seat. "You're acting like I've done something wrong. You know this is just paperwork. We've talked about this." "No, Vera," I said. "You've talked. I've listened." The look she gave me was sharp, but she didn't speak. Marlowe opened the folder again. "Shall we begin?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Line by line. He started reading, slowly, clearly. Each paragraph was like a curtain pulling back to reveal the stage she'd set behind my back. The legal language she'd buried in friendly terms, the clauses that gave her full control, not just over the house, but over my finances, my medical decisions, my name. My hands trembled slightly in my lap, but I kept my face still. No one in that room was going to see me break. "See?" Vera interrupted, her voice rising just slightly. "It's all routine. We've gone over this, Hannah. You're just getting cold feet now because he's making it sound dramatic." Marlowe didn't look up. "Ms. Ward," he said to me, "do you feel comfortable continuing?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I want to hear it all." Vera exhaled through her nose, irritated. "That's enough," she muttered, and then she leaned toward me, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "Don't do this. I'm the one who's been here every day. I'm the one who cleaned your sheets, kept the lights on, made sure you had food in the fridge. You owe me." Her eyes were glassy now, sharp with warning. "Don't make this messy." The red light blinked, recording. I turned my head slowly and looked her dead in the eye. "I didn't ask you for any of it." Marlowe cleared his throat and resumed reading. But the room had already changed. The mask Vera wore was slipping. It was in the way her smile no longer touched her eyes, the way her fingers twitched when she reached for the pen again. I watched her fall apart, one breath at a time, and that was the moment I realized she wasn't in control anymore. "I believe my sister is pressuring me," I said suddenly. My voice filled the room. "I'm not signing anything I haven't read thoroughly, and I won't be signing anything today." Vera froze. Marlowe looked up and nodded once. Then he rose from the table and walked toward the door. I didn't know who or what he was signaling, but I felt it in the air, like a shift in gravity. "Unbelievable," Vera spat, her composure cracking for the first time. "After everything I've done, you're going to turn this into some paranoid performance?" Her hands fluttered toward the folder again. Then, under her breath, so soft I almost missed it, she muttered, "She's still usable. Barely. We just need this done." The words fell like lead between us. Marlowe stopped mid-step. "Excuse me?" he asked, turning around. Vera's eyes widened. "What?" "I'd like you to repeat what you just said," I said, voice like glass. She looked between us, her throat moving as she swallowed. "I didn't—" "You said I was still usable," I repeated. "Say it again, out loud." Vera's mouth opened, then closed. She tried to laugh, but it came out wrong, sharp and hollow. "You're twisting things," she snapped. That's not what I meant. Marlowe walked back to the table and sat down. He didn't smile. The recorder is still on. Silence. I reached down and picked up the red pen she'd tried to press into my hand. It felt heavier now. Not from its weight, but from everything it represented. I turned it slowly in my fingers, then placed it neatly on the table and slid it toward her. I'm done being signed away, I said, not raising my voice. And I'm done being useful. Vera's jaw tensed. You're making a mistake. No, I said, leaning forward just slightly. You did. You assumed I was still asleep. She opened her mouth, but whatever she was about to say was cut off by the door opening again. Marlowe didn't move. I didn't move. But the guard who stepped into the frame did. He stood just inside the threshold, professional but alert. I could feel the heat rising from Vera as she registered what was happening. This is ridiculous, she snapped. I haven't done anything wrong. Marlowe didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward me and asked, Would you like a few minutes alone before we continue? I nodded. Vera stood abruptly, pushing the chair back with enough force that it bumped into the glass wall. She stalked out, muttering something under her breath about ungrateful sisters and being misunderstood. The guard followed her. The door closed again, and the room was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that suffocates. It was the kind of quiet that settles in after a storm. A pause, a reset. I exhaled slowly. My heart still beat hard against my ribs, but my hands were steady. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting to be spoken for. I was the one speaking. Because the next sound I heard wasn't paper rustling. It was boots entering, slow and sure. Two uniformed officers stepped into the room like they'd walked into a dozen tense situations just like this one. Their movements weren't rushed. They didn't draw attention to themselves. They just were, a presence, solid, unavoidable. The taller one nodded politely toward me first. Ma'am, are you all right? I nodded slowly, but I didn't take my eyes off Vera. She had gone pale, just a shade, but enough to notice. Her lips parted like she might speak, but no sound came out at first. Then it started. A rapid-fire string of words, all jumbled and too fast. I'm her sister, she said. This is all just a misunderstanding. She hasn't been herself lately. The accident, she's still recovering. We were just finishing up some legal documents to help manage things. The officer didn't interrupt. He just waited. Marlowe stayed seated beside me, calm as ever. He didn't raise a hand or offer comfort. He didn't need to. His presence next to me was enough. The younger officer approached the table and set down a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the small white prescription bottle I'd handed to Marlowe earlier that morning. The sight of it, clear, undeniable, made something inside me settle. Like the final click in a locked door. The officer said, This was provided to us earlier today by the account holder. We ran a test. Vera opened her mouth again. I gave her that from her cabinet. I didn't tamper with anything. The officer ignored her. He continued, It's not the medication listed on her current prescription. The dosage is incorrect. The label is falsified. Vera's head whipped toward me. You're lying, she hissed. No, I said, my voice soft. You're caught. Her face contorted, something desperate flickering behind her eyes. I was just helping, she said quickly. She's been so tired, so disoriented. I was helping. I stared at her. You drugged me. Silence. Even Marlowe looked up from the document he had been pretending to review. I was making things easier, Vera barked, panic rising now. You don't understand, Hannah. You've always been the weak one. I've cleaned up after you since we were kids. I put my life on hold for you. You're not capable of managing anything on your own. I was protecting you. Her voice cracked on the last word, like even she didn't believe it anymore. The officer nearest the door tapped something into his radio, then looked up at Vera. Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay seated while we collect statements. Vera's eyes widened. You can't do this. We're family. She looked directly at me now. Her voice dropped into a low, sharp whisper. Tell them the truth, Hannah. Tell them you need me. I leaned back slightly in the chair. I felt the slight sting in my arm from where she'd grabbed me earlier. and the fog of those last few weeks, days I'd lost track of, conversations I barely remembered, and I realized for the first time in a long time that I wasn't confused, I wasn't broken, I was angry, and I was done being quiet about it. "No," I said. "You weren't protecting me. You were trying to erase me." The room seemed to hold its breath. Vera laughed bitterly. "Oh, come on. All of this because I tried to manage your life while you healed? You're ungrateful." The younger officer reached for the evidence bag. "Ma'am, your fingerprints were on the cap. That's not something we can overlook." Vera turned to Marlo. "Tell them this is a mistake. You saw, I was just helping." Marlo didn't say a word. Vera turned back to me, fury and desperation colliding in her voice. "You can't let them do this. We're sisters. We're blood. This is just a disagreement." "No," I replied, meeting her gaze without blinking. "This is accountability." The taller officer stepped forward now, a small notepad in his hand. "Ms. Ward," he said gently, "we'd like to confirm your statement. You're alleging undue influence and possible medical tampering?" I nodded. "Yes. I believe she intentionally altered my medication and pressured me into signing away my house and financial rights without consent." He scribbled briefly, then turned toward Vera. "Ma'am, we're going to ask you to stand. You're not under arrest at this time, but we are detaining you pending investigation into elder financial abuse and suspected tampering with prescription medication." "Elder?" Vera snapped. "She's only 48. The younger officer looked over. "Which means she's fully within her rights, and you're fully responsible for anything you did under false pretenses." Vera sat back down with a thud, stunned into silence. I pushed my chair back just slightly. My hand gripped the armrest, not out of fear but to remind myself I had survived this. I had walked through the storm she created, and I hadn't been swept away. The door opened once more, and a second team of officers entered. Calm, professional. One moved to escort Vera out. She didn't resist this time, but as she passed me, she looked down and whispered, "You'll regret this." I looked her in the eye and said the only sentence that ever felt like freedom. "No, Vera." "You will. You're my sister, not my owner." Vera froze in the middle of the room like she'd hit an invisible wall. Her expression held everything: shock, disbelief, pride cracking at the edges like old plaster. No one said a word. The silence was longer than I expected, heavier than anything I could have planned. But for once, the weight wasn't on me. Marlo reached into a drawer behind him and pulled out a folder, a thick white envelope inside. He slid it across the table toward the officers without a word. "This is the transcript," he said finally. "Voice recorder picked up every word. It's time-stamped and logged." The taller officer flipped the envelope open, pulled out the neatly printed sheets, and scanned the highlighted portions near the top. "She's still usable," he read aloud. "Don't make this messy." Vera flinched. Her head turned toward me like she might still salvage the moment, but I didn't look away. The other officer moved to her side and gently rested his hand near her arm. "Ma'am, based on what we've heard and what's been documented, we'll be placing you under temporary detainment for questioning. Please don't resist." She blinked fast, but she didn't move. Her voice, when it finally returned, was a far cry from the sharp, commanding tone she'd used all morning. "I was just helping," she whispered. "She's confused. She doesn't know what she's doing." I stood up, slowly, carefully, but without assistance. No wheelchair, no cane, just me. "Not anymore," I said. They began the process gently, reading her rights, asking her to turn around. She didn't fight them. But as the cuffs clicked into place, her head dropped forward, and for the first time in a long time, she looked small. They guided her out of the office, through the glass-walled corridor back toward the lobby. But before she crossed the threshold, she turned back to me and said, "I did everything for you." I nodded. "No, you did it for control." And I finally took it back. The room felt different after she left, lighter, like someone had opened a window in a house that had been closed up for too long. Marlo sat back down across from me. "Do you need a moment?" I shook my head. He handed me another stack of papers, not from Vera's file, but from the bank's own compliance office. These confirm that no transaction was completed, nothing was processed, all access changes are frozen, and we'll be placing a full internal hold on any future attempts without your in-person recorded confirmation. I nodded again. A woman with salt and pepper hair entered the room next. She introduced herself as a legal representative for the bank's Elder Services Department, even though I wasn't quite at that official age bracket. Still, the systems existed for moments like this. She slid a statement toward me. This is a confirmation that you reported suspected financial coercion and manipulation. Your rights are protected under federal consumer law, and we'll be flagging your account for heightened alerts moving forward. If anyone attempts to modify or move anything, call me, I finished. She smiled. Exactly. I signed. My name, my real signature, not the one someone tried to reduce to a scribble in exchange for silence, landed solidly on the page. Marlowe stood then, extended a hand. I shook it. You saved yourself, he said. No theatrics, no praise, just a sentence filled with weight. He was right. By the time we stepped back into the lobby, the air was crisp and quiet. A few customers still waited, oblivious to what had just unfolded in the private office beyond the frosted glass. Vera was gone. I took a deep breath and started toward the exit. I passed the teller who had brought the water earlier. She looked up, met my gaze, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was the kind of nod that says, I saw, I believed, I backed you. Outside, the sunlight hit different. I rolled toward the curb, feeling the cool metal of the wheelchair arms under my palms. At the edge of the ramp, I stopped, looked down, let the breeze find my skin. Then, with quiet determination, I stood. My knees trembled, not from weakness, but from everything that had held me back before. I took one step, then another, slow, steady. Mine. I left the chair where it sat, right by the bank entrance. Someone would come and collect it, or maybe not. I didn't care. It wasn't coming with me. I walked the rest of the way to the parking lot on my own. When I reached the car, I leaned against the passenger side, took in the moment. I could hear a bird somewhere nearby, the sound of tires rolling over pavement, the buzz of an engine starting up across the street. All normal, but nothing about me felt the same. Back inside, people would shuffle papers and delete scheduled meetings. Maybe Marlowe would take a deep breath, close his door, and exhale everything he had witnessed. Maybe the officers would file their reports, check in with the legal team, move on to the next call. But for me, this was the call that changed everything. I didn't need applause. I didn't need an apology from Vera. I didn't need everyone in that bank to know my story. I just needed one room to believe me. And they did. Because this time, I was coming home on my own terms. I pushed open the front door, and the sound it made, wood against frame, a familiar creak just below the top hinge, rang like a small personal anthem. The light through the lace curtain hit the floor at a soft angle, bathing the old oak boards in a gold that felt earned. I stepped inside, slowly but without hesitation. It had been 2 weeks since that day at the bank. Since the handcuffs, since the words, "You're not alone," didn't feel like a lie anymore. And now, standing in the entryway, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe until this moment. The house still knew my name. I walked through the living room, barefoot, the rug brushing against my heels. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and dried lavender from the little bundle I'd hung over the kitchen window, a ritual I'd picked up from Mom. Vera's things were gone. Every last trace of her had been boxed up, labeled, and dropped off at a storage unit on the edge of town. I didn't go with the movers. I didn't have to. In her absence, space had returned. Not just on the shelves or in the drawers, but in the air itself. The rooms no longer held their breath when I walked in. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet and reached for the teacup with the chipped edge. Mom's favorite. I didn't fix the chip. I left it. It felt honest. Outside, I'd started a small herb garden near the side porch. It wasn't perfect. Nothing in my life was, but the rosemary was taking root, and the basil had already survived one thunderstorm. That was enough. In the backyard, the old bench Mom used to sit on had been scrubbed clean. I'd taken a wire brush to it myself, pulled out the flaking paint, sanded down the rough edges. It sat beneath the dogwood tree, same as always, but now it looked like it belonged again. That's how healing worked, I figured. You don't tear it all down, you clean what's worth keeping. You build again, stronger, wiser, with your own hands. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the hallway, opening the drawer in the secretary desk where we kept old letters. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but when I saw the corner of the photo poking out from the back, I knew. It was a picture of the three of us, me, Vera, and Mom, on the front porch, arms slung around each other, smiles too wide for how complicated we really were. For a second, I considered tossing it, but I didn't. I found a frame from the hall closet, wiped it clean, and slid the photo inside. Then I placed it face down in the drawer. Not gone, just put away. That night, I opened the notebook I kept on the nightstand and pulled out the letter I never mailed. The one I wrote to Vera. I read it aloud, not for her, but for me. I hope you get help. I hope you understand what you did. But you can't come back here. Not like this. Not as the version of you that believed I was weak enough to disappear. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I folded the letter again and tucked it into the back of the journal. Some things don't need to be destroyed. They just need to be filed under never again. Vera had been charged, not with theft like many expected, but with elder abuse and medication tampering, felonies both. I was younger than the technical age for elder protection, but the intent had been clear enough, and the local DA agreed. The documents she tried to sneak through were enough. The bottle of altered pills was the nail. The community talked, of course. Charleston isn't the kind of place where things like this go unnoticed. At the grocery store, the pharmacist wouldn't meet my eyes at first, but at the checkout line, a woman I barely knew from church tapped my elbow and said, "You did what many don't. You spoke up." That was all she said. Then she paid for her bread and left, and it was enough. As the sun began to set that evening, I poured myself a cup of tea and stepped out onto the porch. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine. The wind picked up just enough to sway the ferns in their hanging baskets. I sat in the rocker that used to creak under Mom's weight, now softened with a fresh cushion. I didn't need music. I didn't need a screen or a podcast or a voice to fill the silence. Silence didn't scare me anymore. I sipped slowly, the tea warm in my hands, and let the stillness of the garden wrap around me. Safe isn't just a place, it's a decision. It's choosing to come home and not bring the ghosts with you. It's choosing your name over the roles other people hand you. It's choosing yourself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to believe me. I believed myself. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who call you family. This story isn't just about signatures or stolen property. It's about reclaiming your voice when someone tries to silence it. Have you ever felt like someone tried to take control of your life under the mask of love or helping? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your story. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. We've got more powerful, real-life stories coming your way.